In the center, dwarfed among these beings of various shapes, colors, and sizes, stood Mark Riker, Earth's appointed diplomat. To his right, shimmering like an armored monolith, sat Jarkus, the imposing leader of the Dargul Empire, a formidable figure with indigo scales that caught the low light and a crown of ridge bone running along his head. Mark stood straight and unruffled, though his calm exterior masked the tension within. He was no stranger to diplomatic scenes. He had been trained to endure the scorn of these alien dignitaries. But today, the hostility was evident, far beyond the usual indifference that Earth's representatives faced in these gatherings. The atmosphere buzzed with impatience, and Mark could feel the eyes of countless delegates fixed on him, analyzing, judging, underestimating. Jarkus's deep, resonant voice broke the silence. "So, this Earth," he said, lingering over the word as though tasting it and finding it lacking. "You humans insist on representation in matters of the Empire's concern, yet bring neither the technology nor wisdom to contribute meaningfully. I ask, what can your species, bound to a single planet, offer the Council?" Murmurs rippled through the assembly, a low rumbling sound that underscored Jarkus's disdain. Mark held his ground, clasping his hands behind his back, feeling his pulse steadying as he drew a deep breath. He'd been prepared for this sort of encounter. He knew they viewed humans as little more than cosmic toddlers, barely evolved in comparison to their millennial-old civilizations. "It's true, Jarkus," Mark replied calmly, his voice echoing through the chamber with a steadiness that belied his irritation. "We may be newcomers to the galaxy stage, but Earth has much to offer. Our perspective is unique, our adaptability, resilience, and a resourcefulness that's—" A hissing laugh interrupted him. Jarkus's expression twisted into a sneer, his gleaming eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. "Resourcefulness?" he mocked. "Resilience?" His words dripped with sarcasm as his gaze swept over Mark, a challenge in his eyes. "I have witnessed humans perish on the Council's training grounds, crushed by forces they couldn't even comprehend. Resilient, yes, like an insect squirming underfoot." The Council chamber erupted in low, cruel laughter as the other delegates, emboldened by Jarkus's display, joined in the derision. Mark felt the weight of their scorn pressing down on him, each laugh cutting deeper than he allowed them to see. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, his face betraying nothing. Jarkus leaned back, satisfaction etched across his alien features. "Humans," he continued, "are ephemeral creatures. Your lifespan barely a flicker in the cosmic span. In the time it takes for one of my kind to reach maturity, a dozen human generations would have withered and turned to dust. And yet, here you stand, claiming a place among us, as though your planet isn't but a fragile speck." Mark met Jarkus's gaze without flinching. If resilience were measured by lifespan alone, then perhaps, yes, Earth would fall short. But we've adapted, learned to thrive even in hostile environments. He allowed himself a faint smile. "We've done a lot with the little time we have." This response, though measured, only fueled Jarkus's derision. "You see, Council members, humans cling to the pretense of strength, masking their frailty with words. They speak of adapting, as though that makes them our equals." Mark's mind whirred as he weighed his options. He could respond more forcefully, try to assert Earth's dignity through vehemence alone. But he knew that in their eyes, any show of temper would only reinforce their stereotypes about human impetuousness. No! He would have to endure this display. For now, a delegate from the Razdar species, whose glistening, gelatinous form wobbled as it spoke, joined in. Perhaps the humans should be preserved, it mused, as a curiosity, a study in limited evolution. The laughter grew, echoing in the vast chamber as if the very walls were mocking him. Mark's fist clenched behind his back, but he forced himself to remain outwardly composed, feeling the weight of humanity's pride heavy on his shoulders. They couldn't see him break, no matter how deep the humiliation went. Jarkus let the laughter die down, and then his gaze zeroed in on Mark once more, his eyes narrowing with a cruel glint. Tell me, human, do you ever fear that this galaxy will swallow your kind whole? That perhaps it would be kinder if we removed you from these councils and allowed you to return to your little planet, safe and ignorant? Mark's eyes held Jarkus's without wavering. For a moment, the chamber felt stifling, his heartbeat a slow, steady thud in his ears. Fear, he asked, his tone quieter but cutting through the tension. Fear is for those who see something to lose. Humans don't fear the unknown. We confront it. And in time, we master it. This time, the silence that followed his words felt different. The other delegates shifted uneasily, as if sensing a change in the air. Jarkus's smile faltered, the smug confidence dimming ever so slightly. Perhaps, Mark thought, they were beginning to wonder if they had gone too far in pushing the quiet human in their midst. But Jarkus, ever the consummate provocateur, dismissed it with a wave. Brave words from a species that crawled out of the mud barely a century ago. Enjoy your place here, Mark Riker, while it lasts. But remember, no amount of human bravado will sway this council. Your kind will learn respect. In one way or another. Mark inclined his head, offering a small, inscrutable smile. I appreciate the reminder, and with that, Jarkus sat back, letting his dismissive gaze linger before looking away, signaling the end of his targeted mockery for now. The council's attention shifted, the murmurs settling as other matters took precedence. But Mark's resolve had crystallized beneath the surface. The thought of Earth's future in this council burned bright within him, and he knew that this was far from over. As the proceedings continued, Mark stood in silent contemplation. The game had only just begun, and they had no idea what this human was truly capable of. As the council meeting continued with matters unrelated to Earth, Mark Riker took a moment to let his mind settle into the familiar rhythms of calculated observation. He shifted his gaze across the chamber, his expression controlled and indifferent, yet his focus was razor-sharp. Every alien, every exit, every potential threat registered with cool precision, each detail sliding into place like pieces of a deadly puzzle. He had not come to the Galactic Council merely as Earth's diplomat. His real mission was far darker and deadlier. Hidden behind his diplomatic role, Mark was Earth's covert enforcer, sent to eliminate those in the galaxy who might pose an existential threat to humanity. Only a select few on Earth knew his true identity as a specialist trained in assassination, espionage, and hand-to-hand combat under the guise of diplomacy. Officially, he was here to represent humanity. Unofficially, he was here to protect it by any means necessary. Mark's mind drifted back to his training. He had spent years honing his skills under a strict program designed for only the most promising candidates. His discipline and sharp mind had made him a natural fit for intelligence work, and his resilience in the field had proven that he could operate where others would fail. He had completed dozens of missions without hesitation, but this one, surrounded by alien life forms who underestimated him, would require his utmost caution and control. Today, his primary target was Jarkus, the influential leader of the Dargul Empire. Intelligence reports from Earth's clandestine network had identified Jarkus as a major destabilizing force within the Council, someone who wielded his power ruthlessly and sought to limit humanity's influence in galactic affairs. The Dargul leader had long dismissed Earth as a minor nuisance, but Mark knew it was only a matter of time before Jarkus's attitude escalated from derision to aggression. His goal, then, was simple: eliminate Jarkus before the threat could materialize. Without turning his head, Mark scanned the council chamber, noting the positions of the Dargul guards stationed near Jarkus. They were formidable, bulky creatures with exoskeleton armor and weapons integrated into their limbs. But Mark was already formulating a plan, his mind working swiftly to assess the best approach. If it came to close combat, he knew that targeting weak points in their armor would be crucial. Every detail was critical in his line of work, every second a calculation in survival. The scene played out in his mind. A swift move, a brief engagement, and an efficient exit. But even with his extensive training, Mark knew that the council chamber was a dangerous place to launch an attack. One misstep could result in his capture, or worse, Earth's permanent expulsion from the Council. He would have to bide his time, watch for the perfect moment. His focus shifted back to Jarkus, whose imposing form and self-assured demeanor were cloaked in an aura of authority. Jarkus was powerful, yes, but Mark had noticed something, an almost imperceptible stiffness in his movements, a slight hesitation when he shifted his weight. There was an injury there, Mark realized, concealed beneath layers of arrogance and armor. The Darth Ghoul leader was vulnerable, and that vulnerability could be Mark's way in. As Jarkus spoke with another delegate, Mark's mind churned with potential strategies. He could use the leader's injury to his advantage, exploit it in a close-range assault if he could get near enough. He ran through the tactics mentally, each scenario calculated with precision. An ambush might be possible if he lured Jarkus out of the chamber under the pretense of a private meeting. But Jarkus would need bait, a reason to leave his fortress of guards, and Mark knew exactly how to provide it. A plan began to solidify. He would provoke Jarkus subtly, prodding the Darth Ghoul leader until his pride demanded a one-on-one confrontation. Mark's eyes narrowed as he visualized the scene. A private room, an accidental power cut, and in the ensuing darkness, he would strike. Quick, silent, efficient. If all went well, Jarkus would be dead before his guards even realized what had happened. The Council's proceedings were winding down, and Mark knew his opportunity was approaching. He stood quietly, allowing his mind to clear as he prepared himself mentally and physically for what would come next. He had to maintain absolute control. Any emotion, any hint of hesitation could give him away, and he needed the element of surprise on his side. A faint chime rang, signaling a brief recess, and council members began to disperse for intermission. Jarkus, surrounded by his guards, remained near his station, conversing in low, guttural tones with his aides. Mark observed from afar, ensuring that his gaze went unnoticed. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing controlled. This was what he had been trained for, the stillness before the storm, the quiet before the strike. He turned, readying himself to set his plan into motion, when Jarkus's gaze flicked briefly toward him, the alien's eyes narrowing with something like suspicion. Mark kept his expression neutral, meeting the alien's stare without flinching. The challenge was palpable, an unspoken tension passing between them in that instant. Jarkus's lip curled slightly, a sneer of contempt, but Mark held his gaze until the alien finally looked away. The recess was nearly over, and Mark knew that soon the council would reconvene. But for him, the session's formalities no longer mattered. He was now focused solely on his mission. He would wait for his chance, for the brief moment when Jarkus's arrogance would place him within reach. Mark allowed himself a small, controlled exhale, feeling the weight of what was to come settling within him. With one last look around the chamber, Mark steeled himself. Soon, they would learn that humans were far more than frail, fleeting creatures. The council chamber's lights dimmed to signal the start of the next agenda, casting a cool glow over the vast room. Jarkus resumed his place at the center, exuding the usual confidence that marked his every move. He barely spared Mark Riker a second glance, reassured by his own assumptions about humanity's lack of power. Mark, positioned near the outer ring of delegates, knew his time had come. His preparations were complete, and all he needed now was a calculated disruption to put his plan into action. As a holographic map of a contested star system materialized in the center of the chamber, Mark triggered a subtle device concealed in his sleeve, a custom electromagnetic pulse that selectively disrupted nearby surveillance. He had calibrated it carefully to avoid alerting the Council's broader security systems, but the area directly surrounding Jarkus's station would be temporarily left in a shadow, outside of watchful eyes. The moment passed unnoticed, except by the guard surrounding Jarkus, who stiffened, sensing an anomaly but unsure of its source. Mark moved quickly, his calm demeanor masking the intense focus simmering beneath. In a fluid motion, he crossed into Jarkus's sphere of protection, his steps almost casual as he maneuvered closer. One of the Dargul guards, a hulking figure with glinting armor, extended a hand to halt him. "You're far too close, human," the guard growled, his voice thick with a language Mark barely recognized. Mark looked up, his expression one of innocent curiosity. "My apologies," he said, his voice soft. But in a heartbeat, his hand shot forward, targeting the nerve cluster just beneath the alien's lower jaw, a vulnerability unique to the Dargul physiology that he had memorized from his intelligence briefings. The guard's eyes widened, his form swaying as he struggled to maintain balance, and then he collapsed silently, his body crumpling to the floor. The movement was so precise, so expertly calculated, that the other guards hesitated, unsure of what they had just witnessed. That moment of indecision was all Mark needed. He advanced, a swift and deadly shadow, dispatching another guard with a twisting motion of his wrist that severed the alien's airway. Each strike was a precise blend of skill and efficiency, his training on full display. The council chamber was still engaged in its debates, oblivious to the silent chaos that had erupted in its center. Jarkus, however, sensed the shift in world around, his eyes narrowing as he registered the sight of Mark, no longer the humble diplomat, but a deadly adversary with eyes that betrayed a lifetime of lethal expertise. For a brief moment, Mark saw a flicker of fear in Jarkus's gaze, quickly replaced by anger as he bellowed, his voice a deep, guttural roar that echoed through the chamber. "Guards!" Jarkus called out, but his voice was lost amidst the council's din. The Dargul leader took a defensive stance, his massive form readying for combat. But Mark was faster. He moved like a striking viper, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat, his body coiled and honed for this singular purpose. Mark's fist shot forward, aiming for the weak point he had identified earlier, the injury concealed beneath Jarkus's armor. His strike hit with surgical precision, and Jarkus staggered, a look of shock flashing across his face as the pain radiated through him. His arrogance, his assumption of superiority, was shattered in that instant, replaced by a growing realization of the threat he faced. The council finally took notice. Gasps and shouts erupted from the delegates as they turned to witness the spectacle at the center of the chamber. Mark, relentless and deadly, closing in on the Galactic leader with a determination that defied his fragile human appearance. For the first time, they saw the true capability behind the diplomat's quiet demeanor. Jarkus swung back, his clawed arm slicing through the air, aiming to strike Mark down. But Mark anticipated the move, ducking and twisting in a fluid motion that allowed him to evade the attack. He countered with a brutal kick to Jarkus's injured side, exploiting the leader's weakened state. The blow landed with a force that sent Jarkus stumbling, his towering form faltering under the unexpected assault. One of the council's security forces rushed forward, shouting in a guttural language as he raised a stun weapon, but Mark was already moving. He twisted to avoid the blast, his hand reaching out to grab the guard's arm and redirecting the weapon back toward its wielder. A flash of light, and the guard collapsed, his armor sparking with residual energy. Jarkus, now desperate, lunged with a feral intensity, his sharp claws extended as he tried to overpower Mark with sheer force. But Mark remained unfazed, weaving around Jarkus's attacks with a precision born of countless hours of training. His movements were a seamless blend of speed and calculation, each step designed to wear Jarkus down, to exploit his weakness until there was no fight left in him. With one final, decisive blow, Mark struck Jarkus at the base of his skull, a point of vulnerability he had pinpointed in his assessment. Jarkus's massive form swayed, his eyes wide with disbelief as the strength drained from his body. He collapsed to the ground, the chamber falling silent as every delegate bore witness to the impossible. A human diplomat, standing victorious over one of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. Mark straightened, his gaze sweeping over the stunned council members who had, moments before, laughed at humanity's frailty. There was no pride, no arrogance in his expression, only a quiet, unyielding resolve. He had proven his point, and they knew now what humanity was capable of. He turned to the council, his voice steady and low. "Earth came here seeking diplomacy," he said, his tone carrying an edge that sent a chill through the assembly. "But make no mistake, our patience has limits." He held their gaze for a moment longer, allowing his words to sink in, before he stepped back, his expression unchanging as he surveyed the chamber. The council members remained silent, their disbelief mingling with a newfound respect and fear for the humans standing before them. With Jarkus defeated, Mark knew the galaxy's view of Earth would never be the same. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. The air in the council chamber was thick with tension, a palpable weight that clung to every delegate as they struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Mark Riker stood alone in the center, his unflinching gaze sweeping over the faces of the stunned council members, many of whom had dismissed him only minutes before. Now, their once mocking expressions had turned to wary respect and fear. Jarkus lay defeated at Mark's feet, his indigo scales darkened and his mighty frame sprawled on the chamber floor. The Darth Ghoul leader had been an icon of strength and dominance among the galactic powers, and now his broken form spoke louder than any words Mark could offer. For the first time, the Council saw Earth's representative as something far more dangerous than a mere diplomat. Mark knew he had achieved his mission, not only by eliminating a threat, but by leaving an indelible message. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken questions and hesitant glances. Finally, the Council's Chancellor, an ancient figure from the crystalline Fexry race, floated forward, his translucent body shimmering in the dim light. His voice was brittle, fractured like ice breaking, yet there was a faint undercurrent of respect as he addressed Mark. "Earth's representative," he began cautiously, "we were under the impression that you came here solely as an emissary of diplomacy." He hesitated, his gaze drifting to Jarkus's fallen form. This display of force was unanticipated. Mark's expression remained calm, yet his gaze held an intensity that left no room for doubt. "Earth's intentions remain peaceful," he replied, his tone even but carrying the subtle edge of authority. "But we won't be belittled, nor will we tolerate threats against our people. I was sent here to ensure that Earth's voice is respected in these chambers. And today, I've made it clear that our voice will not be ignored." The council members exchanged wary glances, their expressions a blend of reluctance and newfound regard. Mark had broken the unspoken rules of diplomacy in the Galactic Council chamber, yet none could dispute the clarity of his message. Earth's representative had come prepared, not only to speak, but to act decisively if challenged. One of Jarkus's aides, a Dark Ghoul warrior with scarred scales and fierce eyes, stepped forward, his tone laced with hostility. "The Dark Ghoul Empire will not forget this insult, human," he spat, his words echoing with barely concealed rage. "You may have struck down our leader, but we will have our vengeance. The Dark Ghoul do not tolerate such insolence." Mark turned to face the aide, his gaze unyielding. "Consider carefully what vengeance will bring you," he replied, his voice calm but steely. "I am not the only one Earth has sent to these stars. If you choose to make Earth your enemy, know that you'll face more than one human, and each will be just as willing as I am to defend our place here." The aide faltered, the veiled threat hanging in the air between them, and slowly he stepped back, his defiance tempered by caution. Mark had no desire to escalate further. His purpose here was to secure humanity's respect, not to provoke a full-scale war. Yet he knew that maintaining Earth's position meant showing strength as well as resolve. The Chancellor spoke again, breaking the uneasy silence. "Earth's contribution to this council has been noted," he said, his voice measured, as though weighing every word. "But violence in this chamber must not become precedent. We are here to unite the galaxy, not divide it." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand, Chancellor, and I agree. Humanity seeks peace and cooperation within this council. But respect must go both ways." He glanced around the chamber, letting his gaze linger on each delegate. Let this be a reminder that Earth is here to build alliances, not to be silenced or belittled. A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the assembly, a reluctant yet undeniable acceptance of Earth's strength. In that moment, Mark knew he had secured something far more valuable than a diplomatic agreement. He had won their respect, and perhaps even a measure of fear. The Chancellor raised a delicate hand, signaling the end of the session. "This council meeting is adjourned," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Let all delegates reflect on today's events and consider the paths we wish to walk together." Mark inclined his head in respect, his gaze unwavering as he turned and strode toward the exit. As he walked, he felt the eyes of the entire council upon him, watching wary, each of them reevaluating Earth's role in their alliance. He could feel the weight of their questions and suspicions, their silent acknowledgement of his power. For now, his message had been delivered. Earth's place in the galaxy was no longer up for debate. Outside the council chamber, Mark allowed himself a slow exhale, letting the tension of the encounter dissolve. He had walked a fine line, balancing diplomacy with action, and he had done so with the precision his training had instilled in him. His mission was complete, yet he knew that the council would not forget this day, nor would the Dark Ghoul. As he left the Grand Hall, Mark felt a subtle shift in the air, a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. Earth's place in the galaxy had been carved out with strength and resilience, and it was a place that he and others like him would continue to defend. The stars stretched endlessly before him, vast and mysterious, but Mark knew one thing for certain. Humanity was here to stay, and they would face whatever challenges came next with unwavering resolve. With a final glance back at the council building, Mark moved forward, disappearing into the shadows, ready for whatever awaited Earth among the stars.